All right, let's dive into one of the most famous financial meltdowns in history, the Great Crash of 1929. We're going to look at how a decade of incredible prosperity came to a screeching halt, ending in a disaster that literally changed the world. Let's get right into it. So, you might be thinking, okay, but why are we talking about a crash from almost 100 years ago? Well, because the human emotions that drove it, that wild optimism, the greed, and then the pure, gut-wrenching fear, those things never go out of style. Understanding what went wrong back then gives us a powerful lens to look at the markets we live with right now. One of our sources put it perfectly. In a world where everything seems to be changing, history is really the only reliable map we've got. So let's use it. We're going to walk through the lead up, the crash itself, and the huge lessons that came out of 1929. To really get the crash, you first have to understand the massive party that came right before it. And I mean, it was a party. The roaring 20s in America were just this incredible time of confidence and growth. The country was on a major high after World War I. See, after the war, the economy just exploded. Soldiers were home, factories were churning out goods, and brand new technologies were popping up everywhere, changing daily life. By the late 20s, the country's wealth had basically doubled. It felt like the good times were here to stay. And all of this fed on itself, creating this powerful cycle. You had more people with jobs, including more women than ever before. Banks were practically throwing loans at people, which meant they could go out and buy all these amazing new gadgets, radios, washing machines, even a Model T from Henry Ford. And all that spending, it was making companies ridiculously wealthy. Okay, so people have all this cash and they're feeling good. They start looking for a way to get even richer, faster. And for millions, the answer was obvious: the stock market. It seemed like a total can't-lose game, and pretty soon the entire country was gripped by this speculative fever. Just look at that number. A 218% jump in stock investments in only 7 years. That is absolutely staggering. The market was shooting up so fast, it became this national obsession. It felt like a surefire way to get rich. And this really shows you how crazy it got. This wasn't just some game for Wall Street hotshots. No way. This was everybody. We're talking about ordinary people taking their life savings and betting it all on the market, absolutely convinced they couldn't lose. And the jet fuel for this whole thing was a super risky practice called buying on margin. Basically, people were taking out loans to buy even more stock. It was incredible on the way up because it supercharged their profits, but it also meant their potential losses were just astronomical. Even banks were getting in on it, sometimes gambling with their own customers' money. But here's the thing. While this huge party was raging on the stock market, the actual real economy was starting to show some serious cracks. Factory production was slowing down, wages were dropping, and that mountain of easy credit was turning into a mountain of debt. But the investors, they were too caught up in the frenzy to even notice the warning signs. And that brings us to the autumn of 1929. The optimism started to fade, a little bit of fear crept in, and then, in one single catastrophic week, the whole house of cards came tumbling down. It all started on the Thursday, October 24th. The market opened, and a huge wave of panic selling just hit. This was the first real shock to the system. This was the moment the music stopped. On that one day alone, a record-breaking 12.9 million shares were dumped. The selling was so fast, so chaotic, that the ticker tapes that printed out the prices just couldn't keep up. People were literally selling stocks without even knowing what they were worth, wiping out fortunes in a matter of minutes. There was a brief, shaky recovery, but the real panic, the real terror, hit the following week. On Black Tuesday, October 29th, the market didn't just fall, it went into an absolute free fall. The Dow Jones collapsed another 12%. It was a bloodbath. In just one day, $40 billion of wealth? Gone. Just vanished into thin air. Life savings were completely erased. And all those people who had bought on margin, they weren't just broke, they were buried under debts they had no hope of ever repaying. You see, the crash wasn't just a bad week on Wall Street. It was the starting gun for the Great Depression, the single worst economic crisis in modern history. It kicked off a decade of pain that would completely remake society. And just look at the human cost. In 1929, unemployment was low, about 3.2%. 4 years later, it was almost 25%. Think about that. Nearly 1 out of every 4 people was out of a job. Businesses failed, and breadlines became a normal sight in cities all across America. And the pain spread far, far beyond the investors. Remember the banks that were gambling on the market? When the crash hit, they lost everything. So people who had never owned a single stock, people who just trusted the bank with their savings, ran to get their money, only to find the doors were closed. On average, they got back just 10 cents for every dollar they'd put in. And this wasn't just an American problem, it triggered a global depression. The economic hopelessness was especially bad in Germany, where it actually helped pave the way for Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party to rise to power, which of course eventually led to World War II. It's a terrifying reminder of how a financial crisis can have world-changing consequences. And if you want to understand just how deep this crisis was, get this. The Dow Jones Stock Market Index didn't get back to its 1929 peak for 25 years. A full quarter of a century, an entire generation's wealth, just gone. But out of all this tragedy and hardship, some incredibly important lessons were learned. We saw fundamental changes to the system, all designed to try and make sure a disaster like this could never happen again. Two of the biggest reforms are still pillars of our financial system today. First, the FDIC was created to ensure the money you put in the bank. So if a bank fails, your savings don't just disappear. And second, the SEC was established to basically be the police for the stock market, to crack down on fraud and shady dealings. These were huge game changers. But maybe the biggest lesson of all wasn't about rules and regulations, but about human psychology. The crash was this brutal, painful demonstration of what happens when that pendulum swings from irrational greed all the way over to complete uncontrollable fear. It showed us just how destructive things can get when speculation and debt get totally out of control. And that brings us right back to where we started. The system is definitely safer today because of the hard lessons learned in the 30s. But the human emotions that fueled that bubble in the first place, that greed, that fear, that feeling that, oh, this time it's different, those are timeless. They're still with us today. So the real question is, are we actually remembering the lessons that were paid for so dearly?